Ladies, gentlemen, everybody, welcome back to this episode of Big Noises from Media Voices. I'm Chris Sutcliffe.
And I'm Peter Houston.
And this series sees us taking a bit of a break from our normal operation to speak to some of the most exciting and most interesting people in media, letting them challenge some of the assumptions that we all make. So, Peter, who's the guest this week?
Shirish Kulkarni. I met Shirish properly, as in not on some strange Zoom call, at the News Rewired conference last month. I think it was last month. And he was just really, really interesting and properly outspoken on some very key issues that we talk about. He looks at news innovation and inclusion. So journalism AI and community journalism projects. And he's focused on how you can actually properly use news in a way that serves people that at the moment avoid it and don't see any value in it. His big point in that, and we talk about it here, is that if we were in any other industry, the customer is always right. Whereas in media, it's like, audiences, what's wrong with them? We do news. They should care. They should be paying attention. And his point is, no, you've got to do something. He talks about sense making. You've got to do something that is useful to them, that is, properly delivering value to them, rather than them start thinking, well, this isn't about me or for me.
Does that differ from solutions journalism, or is it just thinking about it in a different way?
I asked, we talked, I don't know if it's the only interview, but I asked him about that. And it's not just about solutions journalism. It's about inclusion in the sense of it's about, this news is about people like me. And this news is referenced in a way that I can understand in my context. So it doesn't necessarily have to offer solutions, but it has to offer some kind of use. His big example, actually, in a weird way, was one of the biggest stories ever is climate journalism. And what he says is that media does climate journalism so badly because there's not a press conference that says, oh my God, the world's burning, we're going to have to do something about this. It's this rolling thing. And media organizations tend to react to it. He says that's why the COP conferences get covered so hard, because there is a bunch of press conferences around it. Yeah. So it's that idea of providing ongoing long-term context, which I guess in the world that he's working in, is not just about, here's context for business or here's context for white middle class people. It's for everyone. It's for how does this impact the global south, or how does it impact certain communities or whatever. So really interesting on that end of things.
There was that fantastic report, actually, and I think it might have been from the Reuters Institute, that was taking a look at how climate coverage is done differently in every country, which I think speaks to exactly that, because in a lot of cases, you're talking about COP in some parts of the global south where they're already seeing so much of the impact. And, everything to do with both droughts and, climate change actually shifting how agriculture works and everything. That is leading the agenda every day. They're doing it in a much more immediate way, which I don't know if there's been a study done on how that's impacting audience attitudes to climate change in the global south. But, that's a fascinating one.
I mean, his point with all of this is there's no quick fixes. If there was one message that kind of wraps up my whole chat with Shirish, it was there's no quick fixes. Short-termism is a problem in all of this. And that idea that you're, caught, we're in for a fortnight or a week or whatever it is, and then we're out again and we don't pay attention to the next call is exactly the same thing. And the way we do these things, the way we tell stories, his point was the inverted pyramid. Idea of telling stories backwards makes no sense anymore. He actually says it's a function of the old way that we used to send telegrams. Put the most important stuff in the beginning of the telegram because you didn't know if it was going to get through, and it was expensive.
It's expensive, yeah.
So it was that side of things. It was a good chat. But we also talked about the idea of inclusion. He does a lot of work on community journalism and the idea of inclusion, and the big takeaway from that was, if you think you've solved the DE&I problem by hiring an intern, who's a person of colour or from a marginalised group, then you're bonkers. How can bringing someone in with absolutely no power as an intern solve that problem? And he quoted Taika Waititi, who was talking about Hollywood, who said, "You fucking broke it, you fix it." he didn't swear. He was much more polite than I am. And it's that idea, bring in an intern. Well, bullshit. If you want to fix it, then recognise you've got a problem and do something about it, whether that is news avoidance, whether that is inclusion, whether that is the way you tell stories digitally. Recognise the issues and then do something about it, and be patient and put the work in.
But it's more than just making the effort. It's, in the short term, it's tracking what changes are possible. So I've been interviewing a load of people about DE&I lately, not just in media, but across marketing as well. And the thing that they say, it always falls down at the part where they report, everybody just takes a note of that and then does nothing about it.
It's also that idea, if you always do what you've always done, you're going to get what you always got. Or whatever that pithy phrase is. I just... again... Great conversation, and this series is actually turning into a proper privilege, to be honest.
Nice.
Real different points of view.
We just want to take a moment to thank Glide Publishing Platform for their support for this episode, for the entire series of Big Noises. So if you don't know Glide yet, it's a content management system for publishers, which means you don't need to get involved in the software, having to spend time, money, resources, reinventing your CMS over and over and over again. Anybody who's worked in media, or I'm sure anybody who's actually worked with any digital platforms at all, will know that actually iterating on a CMS over time just makes it a labyrinth of choices and shortcuts that are designed to do things.
And string.
Exactly, yeah. And by the end, it's all held together with that. So if you want to check out Glide, who actually provide a solution to that, you can go to gpp.io, give them a check, and thanks again to them for their support for this episode and for the entire series.
Thank you.
But Peter, what did you begin by asking Shirish? And based on the previous episodes, I think I know what it is, but why don't you tee it up?
Well, actually, it's a little bit different. I started by asking Shirish why people don't see value in news. Why they think, this just isn't for me, so I'm not going anywhere near it.
Yeah, so I think it's around that question of news avoidance, right? And the industry tends to blame the user and say, they can't deal with the rawness of the news, or they are just not interested. And all my research has shown that people are absolutely crying out for journalism to fulfill a sense-making role for them, to help them understand their place in the world and whether particular policies or particular events are a good or a bad thing for them, their communities, the wider world. And I think people look at the journalism which exists and say, it doesn't really do that job. And so I'm not going to consume that. It's a rational decision not to consume a product which doesn't do the thing they want it to do.
Yeah, I've heard you talk about the media is the only industry that thinks the customer is always wrong, as opposed to everyone else that thinks the customer is always right. What do you mean by that?
Well, I tell a story around that, which is like, imagine you worked at Procter & Gamble or Unilever and you're selling soap powder, and then people stop buying your soap powder a little bit. And then people really stop buying your soap powder. And then people stop believing in the concept of soap powder. And then imagine if you said, oh no, the product is amazing. We still make brilliant soap powder. It's just they don't really understand how great our soap powder is. What they need is a soap powder literacy campaign, and that will solve the problem. And it's like, you and I would not work at Procter & Gamble or Unilever very long, but welcome to journalism, because that's the approach we take. There can never be anything wrong with what we're doing. It's public interest journalism. Journalism is a good thing per se, but actually we're in a world that's moved on from that, and we actually need to do things which provide value to the users.
You're talking about things like when we say, news fatigue or people, there's just been too much news or whatever. That's the kind of thing that you mean?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things in that. I mean, I think news is a hollow genre. And the reason I say that is So Philip Pullman wrote an incredible book about storytelling called Demon Voices. And he talks about how he never uses the present tense because it's like taking a vertical slice through a horizontal life. And what he means by that is like looking through those vertical blinds out at your window at the street in front of you, and you're just seeing a tiny slice. You don't see what's coming or what's been. And in a way, news does that. It takes a vertical slice through a horizontal life, and it doesn't put any of those developments, policies, events in the context of the systems in which they exist. And so it really doesn't help us understand stuff. And in a way, that's a function of the business model of newspapers, right? Because they couldn't do context because they needed you to buy the paper off the newsstand tomorrow. So they wanted built-in obsolescence. They wanted to have new events. But I would argue there are very few new events that just happen out of the blue. They're largely a result of systems or change over time. I mean, climate change is the classic example of that. And it's why journalism has been really bad at covering climate change, because it's a big change which happens gradually over time. And the Earth doesn't put out a press release saying, I'm going to burn in a ball of fire. So we haven't got a press conference to go to. There's not a diary marker for that. I mean, it's why actually we see disproportionate coverage around COP, because everything gets thrown at it. So news is the wrong thing. And I think, again, that kind of too much news, whatever, it's people not understanding what that news means to them. And in a way, there is too much news. So I'll give you an example. The top story on all the websites in Wales a couple of months ago was a crash on the M4 in which one person had died. Now, that's what most journalists understand as news. But when you think about it, does that have value to anyone in the world? It's tragic, of course, but the people that need to know, relatives of the person, already know. No one else gets any value from that. It doesn't help us understand our world or our place in it at all. But it does make people feel like the world is a more dangerous place, perhaps, than it really is.
Is that what you mean by sense making? Like, you cannot make sense of that because it is what it is. Whereas climate change, you can offer something that might help me make sense of it.
Yeah, 100%. It's like, yeah, what can you do to orientate me in the world? And I use that phrase orientation quite a lot. I just want to understand my place in the world. And I'm using I because I'm a news avoider. You know, despite the fact that I've made lots of things for the 6 o'clock news, I don't watch the 6 o'clock news because I don't come away thinking I understand the world better as a result. Like I say, journalism does a thing, but it's not really sense-making. It's not the thing exactly. So I think helping to make sense of the world is journalism's role, and historically was journalism's role. And in a way, it's the business model which has pushed us off in a different direction.
And that's a digital thing, right?
It is a digital thing, but it's also, in a way, a historic thing. So the programmatic advertising model doesn't work for lots of reasons. And even the people that do it know it's not working. But really, we've failed to innovate on lots of different planes, really, I suppose. Yeah, if you look at the digital storytelling, where other people are talking about Web 3, we haven't got to grips with Web 2 in journalism. We're still essentially putting newspaper articles on the web and calling that digital journalism. And that can't be it. You know, the inverted pyramid style of article only exists because the technology, the telegraph, existed. It was expensive, it was unreliable, so you put all the important information at the top. But just obviously, telling stories backwards, that's not how we understand stories. Funnily enough, fairy tales are sense-making. Fairy tales, which start at the beginning and end at the end, are actually how we teach our children to not go with strangers or to not do all those things. They're actually a sense-making role, an educational role. And actually, we could tell stories like that. I did some research for an academic paper, which is now in like the top 10 most read articles in journalism practice, where we showed that the inverted pyramid didn't work. People didn't like it. But I just wrote, take away any formatting or any digital storytelling. I just wrote a plain text article which started at the beginning and ended at the end, and people loved it. So we could do that tomorrow and improve our kind of audience metrics straight away.
Okay, so we could do that tomorrow. Why not? Why is it not being done? Why is people not doing this?
I wish I had the answer to that, because for me, these are all kind of irrational choices that the industry is making, because there are easy wins to be made, but there's a kind of inertia, stasis, that's kind of central conservatism to the industry. And I think that's, in a way, that's a hangover of the golden age of newspapers, when the business model did work and you could just go and play golf on a Friday afternoon and nothing bad happened. And we just thought, in the same way as we thought just being public interest journalism was enough to get people to engage with us. I think we thought that would carry on working forever. And now we don't know what to do. And it's like that thing of like, it's a panic now and no one knows what to do. So we jump at the next big thing. And for a while, the next big thing was Facebook. And we jumped at that. And there's not really ever that strategic vision of what are we trying to do? How do we get there? And I suppose that's the thing that I think we should be thinking about more. What's the long-term view rather than the short-term view? And how we incentivize that, because that's how markets work, right?
I interviewed Neil Thackeray at the beginning of this series, and Neil talked about any publisher needs to know what's the problem they're solving for their audience. And it sounds like that's the same sort of thing that you're saying.
100%. I mean, in product design, people talk all the time about what are the audiences or the users' jobs to be done? What is the thing that's going to make their life easier, better, simpler? And we don't do that enough in journalism. What is the thing which is going to solve those jobs to be done for our user? And yeah, you've got to look at the problem and then work back from the problem to say, what are the activities I can do which are going to solve that problem? I've been talking to a lot of people about diversity and inclusion. And on the same thing, people will jump at the easy kind of shiny thing, which largely is just diversity internships or stuff like that. And it's like, that is not solving the problem you are trying to fix, which is there's not a diversity of stories or whatever. It's something that will look good in your annual report, maybe, but it doesn't solve the problem for the user, the journalist, or for your organization. So it's that short-termist, quick fix also kind of view, because these problems have built up over 20, 30, 50 years. We are not going to fix them overnight. So we need to say, actually, here's the problem, here's the solution, here's how long it's going to take, and we're going to commit to solving that problem.
Do you think that idea that it's not a quick fix, is that part of the issue with all of this? Whether that's diversity inclusion or whether that's changing the way we tell stories or changing the business model, is it just that short-termism?
100%. I mean, you look at the programmatic advertising model and the terrible user experiences that throws up. It's like people aren't wearing it now, but they're certainly going to wear it for another 5 years or 10 years or whatever. So we know that's not going to work, but we don't know what to do. So we'll jump at, Facebook or whatever. And so it's having that long-term view. But I guess the problem is, managers of news organizations don't have to care about that because they think, I'll be out in 5 years or whatever. Look, there are really good managers of news organizations as well. But I think, having that long-term view and realizing there aren't quick fixes is really super important. I mean, people do it with community engagement as well as a particular thing. I've been in those news meetings, as many of your listeners will have been, where they say, we need to build trust with our audience. Let's do that tomorrow. And it's like, that's not how relationships work. You don't meet someone and marry them the next day, largely. Yeah, it takes time. And actually, it's about showing up for people. You show up tomorrow, you show up next week, you show up next month, you show up next year, frankly. And news organizations are quite unwilling to do that long-term work.
Do you think the same approach to DE&I is a problem where, so I've got a diversity intern and I've ticked the box, we're done here. Is that the same thing?
Yeah, it's really, all these questions have sort of the same answers, actually, which is, again, identifying what the problem is and thinking about what are the activities we can do to solve that problem. So if your problem is we don't tell enough diverse stories, we're not reaching vast swathes of the audience, or we're marginalizing, misrepresenting, attacking them, harming them, having a diversity internship, which is the kind of easy answer, is not fixing that problem. And frankly, I've been that person. I've been the only person of color in a newsroom. And it's a horrible experience because you're not empowered to bring diverse perspectives. You're not empowered to, you don't feel comfortable to say what you really think or believe. And so no one wins from that. And actually, you've created a miserable journalist, largely, is the only outcome of that. If you want more people in the pipeline, then you need to work with younger people, frankly, 10, 11, 12, to show them how journalism can be a positive force in their life. And that means making sure that journalism is a positive force in their lives. If you want to tell different stories, then you need to look at your culture in your newsroom. There's been the Taika Waititi clip around this week about where he's on a diversity and inclusion panel and says, it's not my problem to fix, it's your problem to fix. It's you made the problem, you need to fix this. Looking holistically at the culture in an organization and thinking, is this a good place to work? If you're a disabled journalist, if you're a trans journalist, if you're a woman journalist, frankly, we're still in that world in 2023.
Well, I think that idea that, we have a diversity problem, let's bring in the most junior person in the organisation and that'll solve it.
Yeah, I mean, it's ludicrous because they have none of the power. They have a miserable experience. But also what organisations fail to is look at the journalists of colour, the disabled journalists who already work in their organisation or have left that organisation. I'm one of those people that left a mainstream media organisation when I was in sort of middle-ish management because it wasn't a safe space for me. Yeah, I was forced out of the industry, essentially, and I thought, I'll go and work in a supermarket if I have to. That's what the industry drives you to. And I don't think we should kind of gloss over that. And actually, someone in management in all these organizations needs to take a very good, hard look at themselves. I mean, in terms of bringing your whole self to work, I've been in morning meetings where I've just brought up a story about or from Wales and seen the chorus of eye rolls go round the meeting room. And that's a management problem to fix, to say, actually, we cannot be acting like that. Yeah, and this is an organisation which are supposed to be serving Wales. It's ridiculous.
And it's not just about race or gender. There's a class issue in it. There's what you're saying is, that's not news. The whole, if it doesn't bleed, it doesn't lead kind of attitude. So fundamentally, there's a management change needed. Are you seeing that happen?
I'm really not seeing that happening. There's a lot of very big, warm words, but I think there's a failure of people and organizations to engage substantively with the problem. And the reason for that is it takes work. And people want the work to be done for them by the diversity intern or by some kind of short-term program. And actually, the work largely needs to be done by those people, and they don't want to do it. And, there's nothing I can do about that. We can keep making the case, but ultimately, if people want to take a long-term view, then work is going to have to be done, which will need some change. Because the other thing is, people don't want change. And it's like, if you accept there's a problem, the only way you're going to fix that is by changing something. And that's the thing people don't want, which is sort of understandable at a human level, but ultimately is not going to get us out of this big old mess.
Have you got examples of work that you've done, and I'm thinking particularly the People's Newsroom, that sets out to change this in all these different levels that we've spoken about? So how does a project like the People's Newsroom or any other projects you're working on, how does it address this?
Well, a couple of things on that. So the People's Newsroom, I think the interesting thing about that for me was the approach we took in terms of not setting any deliverables for them at the end. You know, we did some training with them. The interesting thing with that was we did systems thinking as the second module, because we wanted to show to them that journalism could be a positive force in their lives rather than a negative force in their lives. And it's taking that longitudinal look at the world. And the WhatsApp group for the cohort just lit up after that, because suddenly they thought, oh, journalism could be a good thing. I remember this is communities who for them, journalism has largely been a bad thing in their lives. And because we didn't set, you say you have to write an article at the end or you have to do a podcast or whatever, people just thought, oh, I could do something with this. And they've just totally run with it independently. One of them's got a radio show. One of them's got a magazine. One of them's writing non-fiction essays. They're all doing their different things, because what we want is a pluralism in storytelling. We don't want people all doing the same thing and largely doing the same thing based around a failed kind of model of the past. I didn't want to teach them how to write an article like you could put on the BBC News website. So that's one thing. The other thing I've done is I've set up a network in Wales called Inclusive Journalism Cymru, which is a network for people from marginalised communities or identities. And we've got 200 members now in Wales. There wouldn't be many more than 200 journalists in Wales. Yeah. And that says a number of things to me. A, the reason we did it was because when I was coming up, I was the only journalist of colour in those newsrooms. I was pretty much alone. We don't want people to feel like that. We want to offer opportunities. We want to offer experience. But what it also shows the industry is the industry says, this is a pipeline problem. We can't employ these people because they don't exist. What that says is we've got 200 members that say we do exist, but maybe your spaces are crappy spaces in which to work, and maybe you need to do the work on that. So we have the evidence, and now it's time for the industry to respond to that evidence and make a rational decision for once.
What's the starting point for that? So we have listeners who are middle to senior managers in publishing companies, and they're listening to this and they're thinking, oh shit, yeah. What's their starting point?
I mean, the starting point, first of all, is to admit you've got a problem, right? It's like being a drug addict. I've got a problem, you know, and like I need to have 12 steps, don't I? Or something like that. But admitting there's a problem and then thinking, do I want to take this seriously or do I want to do the easy thing? Because the taking it seriously bit is hard. So it's just a commitment to culture change. And actually that does need to come from the top, because that is setting the tone, right? So I think, you know, the message to those kind of middle and senior management is like, yeah, just to accept there's a problem, think we need to do something around this, and then make the change. I mean, what I get a bit concerned about is like at conferences, you will see panels which talk about the diversity dividend. Oh, you can make money from, you know, having greater diversity. Well, that is probably true. But if we as an industry don't accept the fundamental argument that people are equal, then we're starting from the wrong point of view. And we need to accept that equality argument first and then move on from there.
I spoke to Gary Reno at Project 23. I've spoken to him in the past. And Gary's thing was, yeah, there is a business benefit, but is that the only way you're going to do this? That's wrong.
No, it can't be the only way. And unless you have that kind of authentic kind of belief that people are fundamentally equal, I mean, that's not going to be good. I wouldn't send anyone to work in that organization because, you know, that's that's not going to work out. I mean, interestingly, with Inclusive Journalism Cymru, this network, people said to us at the beginning, you should have a jobs board. People can, advertise their jobs and, you can have more to it. And I said, we're not going to do that because I've got no control over the experience of that job. And so I don't want to send people into traumatizing scenarios. And actually, right now, there's not an organization which I could 100% guarantee that you would have a good experience in. But our job now is to work at a systemic level with those organizations and say, we can help you get to that point when we can recommend people come and work for you. And that should be, in general, I suppose, the aspiration, right? That people feel your organization is a safe space to work for. That is hopefully not too much to ask.
Well, thanks so much to Shirish for taking part in this episode of Big Noises. And thanks also to Glide Publishing Platform for their support. As mentioned before, if you want to know what life without having to build your own CMS looks like, you can check out gpp.io.
Next on Big Noises is Michelle Manafee. She's editorial director at Digital Content Next. She also recently helped launch a local newspaper, but her real focus is digital media. One of the things that we're kind of trying to get to is how come everyone from local papers to Disney is just dealing with the same kind of problems. And, we talked about, are they the same problems? And more importantly, what's the solutions?
Looking forward to that. But for now, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Big Noises from Media Voices. And goodbye.
Goodbye.